Do you guys want to hear a scary story? Can you imagine being woken up by something that you think is a human being, but it's actually a demon? If you know my lore, you know my lore. If you're new here, then welcome. Let's get into it. I'm going to try and make the context of this quick so I can get to the scary parts quickly. I used to be a babysitter for an extremely haunted house. The oldest daughter, her cover name, I call her Luna. The youngest one, I call her Aura. Luna had an imaginary friend named Pete, who was actually a demonic entity. So the parents of these children worked, they both worked overnight sometimes. Sometimes dad stayed several days for work away, and the mom worked night shifts. So, there were a lot of nights where the parents, one of them, whatever one it was, mom, dad, whatever, wouldn't get home till 3, 4, 5, 6 a.m., 7 a.m., something like that. Very all over the place schedules. So a lot of the time I would go over to their house so I could basically just make sure the girls were safe to go to sleep there and have someone to watch the girls while they slept. It's a very regular schedule for me before I went to school in the morning, because I was in high school at the time that this particular story happened. Like I said, because of the demonic activity and all of the extremely scary shit happening in this house, it was hard for me to sleep there. But this particular day, I was exhausted. Like I said, I worked 3 jobs, and I was going to high school. I was partying with my friends. I was tired. I had a full schedule throughout the week. So on this particular night, there was no activity that stood out to me. The vibes felt, for the house, somewhat okay compared to the normal horrifying shit I usually was experiencing. The girls went to bed super easily. They had a long day that day too. And I had, I went back out in the living room because that's where I would sleep. I'd sleep on the couch in the living room. So I had, my nanny cam. I had everything ready. And most of the time I wouldn't sleep because I was way too afraid to sleep there because it was such a scary place to be. But I was dead tired. So I made my little bed on the couch like I always did. Got my water next to me, plugged my phone in, plugged in the nanny cam, and I passed out at 9, 10 p.m., whatever time it was. Now when the mom would come home and relieve me, she would always try and be quiet when she walked in. I could always hear her set her water bottle down gently, her purse, and then she would just tap or rub my shoulder and be like, "You can go home." So on this particular day, I remember hearing, I heard a door shut. I open my eyes and I see the sun barely start peeking through the blinds. I'm pretty much in REM sleep, okay? As I'm trying to remember all this. This is also over 10 years ago. I remember I opened my eyes and I saw the sun start peeking through the blinds. And so that meant, okay, great, almost time to go home. That was always my cue, it's almost time to go home when the sun comes up. Most of the time. Mom's coming home, dad's coming home, whatever. I remember waking up, seeing the sun peek through, and instantly that's all I fell back asleep. I was so freaking tired. And I always fell asleep with the TV on. I would fall asleep with a tiny light on behind me, and I would turn on, they had a standing fan, one of those ones you plug in, a standing fan. I would turn the fan on for extra noise, and then I would turn the actual fan on with the light on above me. After the door was shut, I fell back asleep like I said. Then I kind of hear very gentle sounds, because the living room, it was living room here, kitchen behind it, one giant room. And I heard it sounded like things being I'm trying to make an example. I don't have anything with me. It sounded like things just being set down on the counter gently, like a cup of water or just things, whatever. It sounded like objects were just being placed on the counter. And I'm remembering piecing this together. I'm still half asleep, but I'm just hearing noises, and I know it's not coming from the nanny cam. I know it's coming from the kitchen. So I'm okay, mom's home. No. Mom was not home. And after I hear these gentle tapping noises, I don't know if you guys have ever seen the movie Dead Silence, but this is what this particular part of the story reminds me of. If you've seen the movie Dead Silence, do you remember when the kettle on the stove is, I forget what it's called, the kettle's going, then it goes completely silent, everything goes dead quiet? That happened to me. The fans turn off, everything goes silent, the TV turns off, and I felt like I could hear my blood running through my body. It was so unsettling, and then I kind of wake up. I hadn't opened my eyes yet, so I'm still just, but everything went quiet, and I was really hoping still, okay, maybe mom just walked through the door and she's just, I don't know, turning TV off, but it was so eerie and unsettling how quiet it was. That you could hear a pin drop in the room. I couldn't hear the static on the nanny cam. So then I go to open my eyes, and before I open my eyes, I'm briefing myself, because I always would brief myself. I was very scared to be here a lot of the time. I saw horrific things. And then I feel like I hear something behind the couch, kind of scuttling, someone just running by. And I'm like, shit, like, I don't want to open my eyes. Like, I'm too scared of what I'm going to see. I know at this point, like, I don't think it's mom. Like, this is just weird. And so I said, I'm going to use a code name for the mom's name because I never expose identities in these stories. I'm going to call her Jen. I was like, Jen, and my eyes are still shut. Still silent. And I'm like, fuck. No, I know it's not Jen. Like, this is paranormal. This is Pete. This is demonic. Like, I already know what I'm in for. And I say her name again. I'm like, Jen. Nothing. Crickets. Silence. Then I hear, not yet. And it sounded like it came from in front of me, but also behind me. So I'm laying down on the couch. It sounded like it was coming from the other side, like the back of the couch, but further down, closer to my feet, if that makes sense. And I open my eyes. And I see the entity that I refer to as Bathsheba in these stories because she looks a lot like Bathsheba in Conjuring. That is the best way I can describe this specific entity. She was fucking terrifying. Looked just like her. So I open my eyes and Bathsheba is bent over the couch, contorted. So essentially, my feet are like right here and her head's like right here. Except she was bending back like over the couch, looking at me. So basically her head was like hanging backwards and her body was hanging over the couch. And she was just smiling at me and she had a hand up. I remember specifically her hand was like this. It looked like it was trying to come at me and grab me. Just a big smile bent backwards. I scream, I close my eyes and I open them and it's gone. I start panicking. I remember I called like the mom because I just woken up. I checked my phone. She actually did text me, I'm on my way home. And I called her right when I woke up. I was like, hey, I just had like a really bad dream. Like, are you close? And she was like, yeah, I'm like 5 minutes away. Is everything okay? Because people ask me all the time, these stories, the parents believe you? No. I tried to bring this up several times to them. The kids tried to, their own family members tried to bring it up to the parents. They were in complete denial that anything was going on in their home. So I'd always just say, like, I have nightmares. They'd say their kids had big imaginations. That was not the case. And I blocked that story out of my memory because it horrified me for so long, but I've been slacking on my scary stories. So even telling and reliving that story, I hate low-key because I'm picturing like what I saw and it just, disgusting. That's all I have for now. Bye, y'all. Sweet dreams.
Something pretended to be my husband and I didn't realize it until it was too late. Story time. The person who submitted this would like to be anonymous. I'm gonna go ahead and tell the story in the first person, but it did not happen to me. A while back, there was construction being done in my home. We were getting our kitchen and downstairs bathroom completely remodeled. So all day we had workers coming in and out of the house. So the whole downstairs was a complete mess. At the end of the night, my husband and I were so exhausted that we decided we were just gonna order food to have for dinner. I decided to grab my phone, order the food, and have my husband go pick it up. The food place was only about 5 minutes away from the house. So my husband left. It was just myself, my 3-year-old daughter, and our cat Boba downstairs, just waiting for him to get back. After about a half an hour, I realized that it was taking him too long. Like, the place was only 5 minutes away. The food should have been quick, but it was taking a while. When out of nowhere, I hear a knock on my front door, and I hear my husband say, hello, hello, hello. Without thinking it, I went ahead and just opened the door, and when I opened the door, there was no one there. I instantly felt this like wave of dread, like almost enter my home. The moment I opened the door, I realized that he wasn't there. When I look back, I can see my 3-year-old daughter just kind of standing there staring at the door, and our cat Boba came up to the screen, sniffed it, and kind of walked away. I shut the door and was confused because the voice sounded just like my husband. It wasn't distorted. It didn't sound weird. It sounded exactly like him. About 5 minutes later, I hear another knock at the door. This time I happen to look at the peephole and I see my husband standing there. When I open the door, he tells me that the restaurant had actually messed up the order, which is why it had taken so long. The next morning, my husband wakes up and tells me that our cat Boba had passed away. He said that he found him just laying on the ground, completely like cold and stiff. Till this day, I believe that when I opened that door, whatever entered into my home took my cat's life. I went ahead and added a photo of Boba right here. This story actually made me extremely sad because I'm a huge animal lover, and when very dark entities enter the home, a lot of times they will go after like the weakest person in the home, which happened to be her cat. That's why it's very important to always like double check, because you just never know. And again, like, she was waiting for her husband. He was going to be home any minute, so she's not thinking anything. So this literally could happen to anyone. So sad.
Scary story time while I talk about things that were considered normal in my toxic household while I make pink slime. The girl is no longer living in that environment, and I thank God every day for it, because y'all, I almost took myself out. Within a month of me being there, hands were put on me due to a drunken argument. I wasn't even the drunk one. I'm sober. So, yeah. Get your money's worth and let it drain. Y'all already know. It happened about, I want to say 11 to 12 days before my 21st birthday, and two people in the house started arguing, and it was like at 3 a.m. And keep in mind, I'm new to this situation, so I had no idea like what was really gonna go on. I'm standing in the way of my door, and then next thing you know, somebody charges at me, picks me up, and drop kicks me, and then kicks me while I'm on the floor. I was gasping for air. Yeah. I was on FaceTime with my sister when it was all going down, and all I remember is being picked up, slapped, phone dropping, and I'm just gasping for air at this point. Like I'm out of it. So as I'm getting up, I can remember hearing like one of the person's friends saying like, "Why would you do that to her?" Like, keep in mind, these are people that I lived in a household with who are all over the ages of 35 years old. And I had only been there for about a month, so I really didn't know anybody. And so when this happened to me, I was sitting, like, I literally went outside and threw up all over, like, outside. And I was, like, in shock because, as y'all know, I was abused as a kid. So, like, all I'm just seeing in my head is just flashbacks of my childhood. I didn't go to sleep until, like, 4 in the morning that night. And I remember waking up to hearing more arguing. And the only person who thought it was a big deal was the person who stood up for me and was like, "Why would you do that to her?" To this day, I've never gotten an apology by that person, like, to this day, about that situation. Not that he even remembers. I want this slime to be bigger, so I'm gonna add more glue. The next situation, whoa, come on. So after that situation, I was the target for all of that person's arguments. Like, every single time they would have an argument, they would always bring me up for whatever reason, but I was the fundamental issue. Over the course of the next, I want to say, couple of months, I was literally dealing with the person that I loved being called out of their name constantly. I heard it through the walls. I heard their arguments. I heard their fighting, like, and I was just living in this by myself. And it was like the next day happened, they were best friends, and like, I'm the only crazy one in the house because I'm the only one confused on why this is okay. My sister and somebody who's going to remain anonymous went over to their sister's or their auntie's house, and they came back. My mom told me to wait outside for them to come back. And that night I went outside. This person was literally talking crap about my mother to children. So I told them, I couldn't hold it in no more. I told them, I was like, "Yo, like, you don't have to address this to kids like they're children." And they were like, "I'm gonna do whatever the F I want to." And then this person escalated, told me that they were gonna punch me in my effing face. I was a huh, I was a B word. Like, y'all, I was called out of my name up until 4 a.m. that night. 4 a.m. Now, I will say, towards the end of my stay, this person did like try to clean up their act, and they stopped trying to argue and fight as much. But at the same time, it was just like, I've been through months of hell. Okay, I was going through so much, and nobody told me sorry. I think I was told sorry one time by the person's dad, and this person was like, "Hey, I'm sorry on his behalf." And after that, never again. I don't know why this slime is so like jiggly, but like it barely pokes, but it's like it makes bubbles. Okay, I lied. It pokes. It pokes good too. I'm tripping. What is wrong with me? I'm gonna do one more bubble for y'all.
I have always lived in a big neighborhood with a history of being haunted due to a lagoon nearby where many people have died. One day, a few weeks before Christmas, my mom, my sister, and I were on our way to a party, and my older brother decided to stay home alone. At the time, he was around 11 or 12 years old. We left the house around 4 p.m., and as we were leaving, we saw a lady crash into one of those electricity poles, causing all the lights to go out in our neighborhood. We called my brother, and he told us he wanted to stay home, saying it was not that big of a deal. While we were at the party, a few hours later, I received a call from my brother, and he sounded really scared. He had started hearing loud bangs coming from my parents' room. He got scared and decided to change and go to my grandma's house, which was a few blocks away. While he was changing, He said he saw a shadow out of the corner of his eye passing through our bedroom door. He started changing faster and was on his way out when he passed our living room. He swears he saw the shadow of a little girl wearing a black dress standing next to our Christmas tree. He panicked and ran to my grandma's house. Once he called us, we decided to go home. My dad went to my uncle's house to explain to him what my brother saw. My uncle is a guy who loves paranormal activity, and he lives about 2 houses down. When my dad was there, he met with my uncle and my uncle's neighbor, who was around 15 or 16 years old. My uncle explained to my dad that his neighbor was home alone and heard someone knock on his front door. When he peeked through the window to check who it was, he saw the same shadow of a little girl wearing a black dress. This is one of many stories I have. We have since moved houses, but we still live in the same neighborhood. I have a feeling that whatever was at my old house followed us, because we have had some experiences that we can't explain.
Have you ever seen something so wild that you cannot wrap your head around it? Yeah, this is one of those stories. So one of my followers, her name is Annabelle, sent this story in, and she says she'd shared it before, but nobody ever was able to give her an explanation of something that they experienced that was similar or what they thought it might be. So she's hoping that someone in the comments can finally give her some answers. She says that this happened around 2015, 2016 in Andersonville, Georgia. Now, right off the bat, she does mention that she has always been pretty sensitive to paranormal things, including certain places having an effect on her, some places more than others. And she said Andersonville specifically drains her. It always makes her feel off when she is there. She also mentions that this place is ridiculously haunted. So one day, she and her friend were driving through, and nothing in particular happened at first. They were just laughing and talking and listening to music. All totally normal. And then everything shifted in a second. Okay, so they rounded a corner, and there was this massive white dog standing in the middle of the road. And when she says massive, she means it. She says that this thing was at least as big as the car that they were driving. Not like, oh wow, look at that big dog. Like, this dog was impossibly big. And instantly they both knew there was no way that they were not going to hit this thing. She says that there was no time to swerve around it, or room for that matter, and it was either hit this thing or go straight down into the trees. And she said, judging by the surroundings, they would have definitely been unalived. So they just braced themselves for impact with this humongous creature. And then nothing. There was no impact, no sound, no feeling of hitting anything. And they're kind of frozen there, trying to process it, kind of looking at each other. And then they looked back to see. And there was nothing there. Like, this creature or dog or whatever it was completely gone. Not any kind of disappearance of it off into the distance, just not there anymore. She said there was nowhere for it to have gone, no time for it to move, not even any tracks anywhere around the area. So she pulls the car over and she's just shaking. She drives the car home, and when she gets there, she's just getting worse and worse. Now she's pale and doesn't feel right. Her dad realized something was very wrong, and it took him a while, but he finally got her to tell him the story of what happened. She also said that her dad went back out there multiple times to try to find whatever the heck this thing was, and he was never able to locate anything. So the next morning after the incident, Annabelle ended up going to the hospital, and she had to stay there for 3 days. And they all chalked it up to exhaustion, but she said, no, it was that dog. All right, guys, do your thing. Let her know in the comments what your thoughts are. Have you ever heard of anything like this before? I know she'll be in the comments checking it out. And if you have your own creepy story, I would love to hear it. And if you're new here, you gotta follow for more creepy story time.
It is time for another spooky follower story. Guys, this one is weird. I cannot think of a rational explanation for it. I am Autumn in Appalachia. Send me your spooky stories. Add me on Facebook. Subscribe on YouTube. Same handle. Without further ado. Okay, this follower will be tagged in the video, but I'm not sure of their name, gender identity. So for the sake of the video, let's call her S. S lives in the Maldives. Around 2010, she is working as a dental assistant at a local clinic. One day, a young girl around 12 or 13 years old comes in for a consult with her dad. Now, they had taken a trip from like a nearby island to the capital city to get there. That was like a few-hour ride via ferry. So this little girl and her dad sit down and kind of frantically begin explaining the story. And when S and the doctor first heard this, they thought there has to be a rational explanation until they looked in this little girl's mouth. Now, when she opens her mouth, her front tooth is missing. She and her dad both, in a very compelling way, like they're viscerally shaken up, explained that the day before, this little girl's tooth was in her mouth, fully intact. It is not loose. There is no dental trauma. There's no cavities, anything like that. No wiggling around, right? She goes to sleep with her tooth in her mouth, wakes up the next morning, and when she looks in the mirror, she is shocked that her tooth is gone. Now, she obviously starts looking to see, like, is there like, bleeding, anything? There's nothing. There's no bleeding. There's no pain. And if you've ever had a tooth pulled, even if it just fell out, like if you had it pulled, especially if you have it pulled, you're going to feel it. Even with medication, there's going to be pressure. You can audibly hear it. How is it possible? And this little girl said this, for her to go to sleep and her tooth be pulled out of her mouth and her not wake up, her not feel it. That doesn't make sense, right? And so the dentist goes to look in her mouth and is shocked himself because there is not a scratch on her gums. It's like the tooth was never there. Whether it fell out or whether it was pulled out, it is not logical to think that there is not going to be broken gums, bleeding, something. The way they explain this story, S said it was very compelling. Like she actually got goosebumps on her arm because they seemed like they were telling the truth. They took a few hours ride to go to the city to like have a dentist look in her mouth because they did not know how to explain it or what happened. And the dental staff didn't know either. They had no explanation for it. Y'all let me know what you think about this. It is weird. Like if they are telling the truth, how do you explain that? How do you explain there not being a scratch on her gum, right? It had to be something supernatural. I don't know, guys. I've not heard a story like that, right? That's oddly specific. Like even that in itself is compelling to me. I don't know. Honestly, when I heard this, the first thing I thought of just off the top of my head was the Fae. Maybe it's just like, I think I've watched a horror movie about this before, but there's like this creepy movie where this family moves into this house and there are like fairies and stuff like that live in this house and they want to take like children's teeth. They had like I don't know why. And that's just kind of, it goes along with the lore, right? Teeth going missing, don't step in fairy rings, people being taken off to the fairy realm, never to return. The tooth fairy. Maybe she's not out here in a pink tutu skirt with little fluttery wings. Maybe she's bawling and shot calling. Maybe she doesn't leave quarters under your pillow. Maybe she's a menace to society. Tooth fairy, we need some answers. Y'all let me know what in the Kentucky Fried Hell your theories are on this. And stay tuned, as usual, for more spooky stories. Also, I've been down the rabbit hole recently with like creepy mermaid, like deep sea siren type of stories. And also, have y'all seen that Gerald the Dolphin shit? If you have not, look that up because it is weird. It does make you think. Nephilim stories. What else? Vampire stories. In the year of our Lord and Savior Betty White 2026, like, do we really think at this point anything is that far-fetched? Really? Come on, y'all. If you have any stories like that subject matter, send them to me. I'm interested. I'm like hyper fixated on that shit right now. Y'all have a good one. I love you.
I have another story time. This one happened in 2021 on Thanksgiving. Cameron's whole family had gone to his grandmother's house for Thanksgiving, but because he wasn't feeling well, he decided to stay home. As he's laying in bed in deep sleep, he gets woken up by his mom calling him from downstairs. Right away, Cameron realized that there's no way that that was his mom, being that his room was right above the garage, so he would have heard the garage door open. 1, and 2, he knew that his mom was at his grandmother's. But regardless, Cameron decides to answer, so he sits up and goes, "Yes?" He's met with complete silence. He doesn't hear anything. He's thinking maybe he's delirious from being sick and he's hearing things. So he lays back down. The minute he lays back down, he hears it again. His mom calling him. At which point he gets up out of bed. He walks over to his door and looks down the stairs and says, "Yes." But again, he's met with complete silence. The whole house is completely silent. He decides that he's going to call his mom and try to figure out what's going on. When he calls her, he asks his mom where is she, and she responds with that she's still at her grandmother's house with the whole family, like they're still having Thanksgiving dinner. He then tells her that he keeps hearing her voice calling his name, but to not panic, that he's probably just again delirious from being sick. Once Cameron hangs up the phone, he hears the mom's voice again. At this point, it was almost like a light bulb went off in his head and he realized what he was dealing with. He lives right near a very large forest, so encountering these things was not very uncommon, and he was always told what to do in the event of him ever encountering one of these things. That you never respond, you ignore it, you let it keep calling your name, you don't interact with it. Eventually the voice did get tired and stop. When his parents got home, they believed him, like they were fully aware that this is the known thing. They advised him to get cleansed. Once you encounter these things, even if you don't really like get in contact with them, they leave behind a lot of negative energy, so you have to cleanse yourself. Cameron will still hear it from time to time whenever he's feeling stressed or feeling down.
Weird spooky story time, and it sounds like J. Crew also has problems with doppelgangers. I started working at the Gilroy outlets when I was 20 years old. I'm now 44. I've worked at stores that are long gone. Billabong, KB Toys, Charlotte Russe, Bath & Body Works, J. Crew, Chico's, and New Balance. Ooh, those were some flashbacks. I worked there when those stores were there too. But only 2 of those places are where things really happened. J. Crew being the most active in the old location of New Balance. At J. Crew, it started with hearing someone walking around the store in high heels. It would always be early in the morning before we ever even opened. I worked in the stockroom, and randomly I would hear the rack of empty hangers moving, like someone had run their fingers through them. When I turn around, the hangers would be still swaying, but no one would be there. One time at closing, I was fixing some shirts in the back corner of the store, and I felt someone touch my back. I squirmed because I'm really ticklish, so I turned around thinking it was a coworker, but no one was there. And there was no possible way anyone could have run off without me noticing. Another night, we were ready to leave. The manager had just set the alarm and turned the light off, when suddenly the phone rang. The manager picked it up, and there was nothing but static on the other end. We screamed and ran out of there so fast. I would have too. At the old New Balance location, though, there was something I can only describe as a doppelganger. There used to be a long hallway in the stockroom where we stored things like posters and ladders. Nothing too bulky, since it was also an emergency exit. One day, I was walking toward the hallway and saw what I thought was my coworker hiding around the corner. I could see his shoe in the back of his head. I figured he was trying to scare me, so I decided to scare him first. I walked slowly toward him, but when I turned the corner, no one was there. He couldn't have gone out the emergency exit. The alarm would have gone off. And when I left the stockroom, he was up at the front of the store. Another day, I was walking in for my shift, and a coworker was coming out of the stockroom. She looked surprised to see me and said, "Weren't you just in the back going to the bathroom?" I told her, "No, I literally just got here." She said she had seen me turn the corner toward the bathrooms, and we just stood there like, what the hell? Other times, shoe boxes would randomly fall off the shelves, like they were pushed, or you'd hear them being moved around when no one was back there. This is so crazy that I'm getting a second J. Crew store. And again, this is 5 stores down from where I worked, and my original outlet story, the girl said the most active section of the outlets is the side that In-N-Out is on, and these are all that side. Let me know in the comments what you guys think, or if you ever had an experience at the Gilroy outlets or anywhere, please send me your story.
This woman is Diane Whipple, and she experienced a horrifying death that was senseless and completely preventable. This is the story of Diane Whipple and the case of People versus Knoller. Reminder, I tell a lot of dark stories on this channel, and this one's kind of gory, so viewer discretion is advised, but follow along if you want to hear more. So this is Diane Whipple. A little bit about her is that she's a rock star athlete. She almost went to the Olympics for track and field. She was an All-American lacrosse player, and she was a really noteworthy lacrosse coach. She lived with her domestic partner in an apartment building with these 2 garbage people. This is Marjorie Knoller and Robert Knoll. A little bit about them. They are both lawyers, they practice law out of their apartment, and they're both terrible dog owners. Why do I say that? Well, these are their dogs. Their names are Bane and Hera, and they're Presa Canarios. Presa Canario breed is that they are enormous dogs. They were used to herd cattle and were typically used as guard dogs. Fun fact, it's actually the only time I've seen Victoria Stilwell from It's Me or the Dog look like gravely concerned that this dog could really inflict harm on somebody. And that's not a condemnation of the breed. We all know that any dog can be wonderful with responsible owners, but that was not the case here. The original owners raised Bane and Hera to be vicious. The dogs originally came from a dog fighting organization that was run by a member of the Aryan Brotherhood who is currently serving a life sentence in the Pelican Bay State Prison. And that criminals' lawyers happened to take custody of the dogs, which happened to be Marjorie Knoller and Robert Knoll. So now that we understand the characters, let me tell you about how the attack happened. Warning, it's brutal. So on January 26th, 2000, Diane Whipple just went grocery shopping, and she is returning back to her apartment carrying groceries. While she was walking up to her apartment in the hallway, Marjorie Knoller just happened to be taking the dogs out of her apartment at the same time. The dogs escaped her control and started to attack Diane Whipple. But these dogs are usually meant to herd cattle, and as strong as Diane Whipple was, she just wasn't a match for these 2 dogs who were trained to fight and be vicious. Diane Whipple wound up suffering a total of 77 wounds to her body. The only place she didn't have any injuries was her scalp and the bottoms of her feet. Mind you, all of this is happening in the hallway of the apartment building, so people can hear these attacks happening, and it's horrifying. So another neighbor winds up calling 911 after hearing Diane Whipple scream. Mind you, the dog owner who was just standing there did not call 911. One of the dogs winds up biting Diane Whipple in the neck, and that winds up being the fatal blow. She was taken to the hospital, and the official cause of death was labeled as loss of blood from multiple traumatic injuries as the result of dog bite wounds. Diane never made it into her apartment with the groceries. Bane was euthanized immediately after the attack. Hera was seized and later euthanized. Diane Whipple's memorial service was attended by more than 400 people. It was a completely senseless tragedy. This did not have to happen. Now, earlier in the video, I said that this was the first time that people were charged with something that their pets did. And let's talk about that for a little bit. So here's what makes this a special case. In America, when it came to pet ownership, there was a standing rule that dogs used to get 1 free bite, meaning that if your dog attacked someone, you weren't held responsible until it happened again. But the 2 owners of these dogs knew that these dogs were dangerous, and it was documented that they knew this. And several witnesses can attest to this as well. Both of the dogs had attacked people before. Neighbors had complained about the dogs for months. the dogs had already attacked several people. A professional dog trainer recommended that the owner should muzzle these dogs because they were dangerous. But they refused. Why didn't they heed these warnings? No one really knows why, other than the fact that they're just terrible, negligent dog owners. Side note, it's been speculated that Marjorie Knoller may have had some romantic ties with the Aryan member in prison, which is why she took the dogs in the first place, but I don't know. It's just something I read, and it's not confirmed. Anyway, so there's that, and there's the fact that Marjorie Knoller didn't do anything to help Diane Whipple during the attack. She claimed that she used her body to attempt to shield her, but the prosecution pointed out that she didn't have any injuries to her aside from like a couple bruises on her hands, and the fact that she did not call 911 for help at any point during the attack. So what prosecutors were trying to prove was something that no one had ever argued before, that knowing your animal could be a weapon. The fact is that animals can be dangerous. It requires a lot of responsibility on us as owners to make sure that they don't harm anybody else. So if your animal is effectively a weapon and has hurt people before, and many people have claimed that they're dangerous, but you continue to ignore every warning and remain indifferent to the potential harm they could cause, then it stops being an accident and it's actually a conscious disregard for other human life. And in 2008, California agreed. And Marjorie Knoller wound up being convicted for second-degree murder for something her dogs had done in the death of Diane Whipple. This was the first conviction of its kind in U.S. history. Diane Whipple's partner, Sharon Smith, succeeded in suing Knoller and Knoll for $1.5 million in damages. And if you didn't hate them enough, here's another reason to hate them even more. This is another noteworthy case because it brought up the argument of whether or not a same-sex unmarried partner is entitled to damages for the death of their life partner. Like, the defense used that as their main defense about why she shouldn't get any of the damages. They did not succeed. Sharon Smith did win her case, and she wound up donating some of the funds to the women's lacrosse team at St. Mary's College. Marjorie Knoller is still in prison. She will be eligible for parole in 2029 when she is 70 years old. And Robert Knoll was released from prison, but he wound up dying from heart failure in 2018 on his 77th birthday. This was a landmark case in many ways. It set precedents for pet ownership, same-sex domestic partnership, and it clarified the meaning of implied malice murder. But the bigger picture is that it reminds us about how quickly things can change and how important justice is. This was a horrible thing to happen, and really nobody deserves it. Well, maybe a couple people might deserve it. But least of all, a hardworking, accomplished woman like Diane Whipple. And the world lost an excellent coach, a woman lost her partner, and Diane will never have another chance to live the rest of her life. And now, neither do reckless dog owners. And that is the story of Diane Whipple and how one case changed the law forever.
I wasn't going to talk about this, but it seemed like you guys wanted a little bit more to the story. So the story that I talked about a couple of days ago about the house that I used to clean and about the lady in the picture and how her picture changed, I left something out of part 1 and I'm going to go ahead and include it in this video. About a month after the whole ordeal happened, somebody showed up at my door. And it wasn't from them knocking, they were just standing there. So I looked at my camera app and it was the same lady, same dark hair, blank expression. She was staring directly into the camera, not moving. I obviously didn't answer. About 10 minutes later, I checked my camera. She was still standing there. This time she had scooted up closer to the camera and she held up a photo. I already knew what it was before I really looked into the picture, and it was a picture of that hallway. And there wasn't just one picture of me framed up in the hallway, there was multiple. In each picture, I'm in a different place in my apartment, sleeping, cleaning the kitchen, laying down on my couch, all taken from angles that don't make sense. It was like she was inside of my walls.
So anyways, I called the police, and when they arrived, the lady was gone, of course. No footprints, no car, no visual video on the street cameras. They told me it was possibly just somebody messing around with me. I said, okay, try to ignore it. That night, I went to bed, and something really weird happened. I woke up at 2:17 a.m., and I heard something in my hallway. A soft, shifting sound going on. So I sat up and I froze and I listened. I didn't hear anything at first besides the shifting, and then I kept listening for a couple more minutes, and then I heard it. I heard a whisper. From the other side of my bedroom door, I heard, "Don't let her see you, see her." My stomach dropped. That was the same message that was on the bathroom mirror when I was cleaning that exact house. So I picked up my phone, turned on the flashlight, was looking directly into the hallway, and that's when I saw it. It took a minute for my camera to adjust, but it showed her, and she was just standing there, very still, staring straight into my door. I stopped breathing because I looked long enough where she started to smile, not wide, but just enough where she knew that I saw her. She lifted her hand and she pointed directly at me. This is a confusing part because when I had my camera looking at the door, I know that I closed the door, so I don't know how I was seeing into the hallway, but it was like I was seeing her from on the outside pointing at me. At some point, I wound up falling asleep, and when I woke back up, my bedroom door was open when I know that it was closed, and my camera was still recording, and so I stopped the footage, and when I looked back at it, at exactly 3:04 a.m., my door slowly came open. It didn't open all the way, but just enough for something to slip in. You don't see something coming in my room, but you see a shadow kind of going across the floor, and then it cuts out. I deleted the video, and I stopped sleeping with my door closed because I don't think she needs it anymore.
There was this girl who went to Juilliard. She was a violinist, and she started failing her classes and couldn't get any gigs. So she started to say, to her friends, I would do anything to be famous and get gigs. But she didn't realize who was listening. It wasn't just her friends, but also the devil. Now, she goes to bed one night and she has this really vivid dream. There's this beautiful man. He comes in her room and he's naked. And he says, I will give you fame and fortune. All you have to do is give me your soul. And she goes, yeah, sure, I'll do that. And so all of a sudden this contract appears right before her. And he says, let me see your hand. And he cuts her finger and says, sign this contract with your blood. So she signs the contract. And all of a sudden the contract, he picks it up and puts it in his hand. And it turns to flames and then falls on the floor as a bunch of ashes. So she wakes up and she's, a little bothered by the dream, but thinks it's just a dream. Until she looks at her finger. There's a cut. And on the floor is a pile of ashes. So fast forward several years, she becomes famous and starts traveling all over the world and lands all these huge gigs. But then she starts getting involved in partying and she contracts AIDS. Now, she ends up to the point where she's on her last journey of life and she's in the hospital and she's talking to her mother, who's Filipino, and she tells her this story about the dream she had. And instantly her mother says, we need to talk to a priest. We need to call a priest. So she calls up a priest and talks to the priest. And he says, I will come there right away and speak with your daughter. So the priest comes and he comes in the hospital room and he says, you made a blood pact with the devil. And in order to break that, you have to make a blood pact with God. So you need to sign this creed with your blood. And the doctor overhears this, is like, no, she can't do that. She has AIDS. And he goes, she has to do this. You can leave the room, but she has to do this. So he, cuts her finger and has her sign the creed. And instantly she flatlines. And the doctor comes running in and, he's angry with the priest. The mother's angry. And about 15 minutes had passed. And she gets up out of the bed. And she's fine. They run a bunch of tests. She has no AIDS, no HIV. She's completely clean. And she goes on to live a normal life. Did you ever do the Bloody Mary challenge? Now, the legend goes that if you were to turn off the lights and say her name 3 times into the mirror, then she might appear. Sometimes it was said that she would rip out your eyes. Sometimes it was said that she would pull you into the mirror. Now, who was Mary? Some people believe that she could be traced back to the 1800s to a woman named Mary Worth, who lived in a small town in New England. And the story goes that the townspeople thought she was a witch. And when children started to disappear, they suspected that it was Mary Worth. So when they go to her house, they were shocked to discover she was using the blood to bathe in because she thought it would make her younger. So it's said that she was taken and burned at the stake. And her last words were, if you were to say her name in the mirror, then she would return. Some people also speculate that it might come from the 1800s belief that the widows would often call to their deceased husbands in the mirrors, thinking they would return, only to see something else. Now, there was a story from this girl named Ashley. She said when she was younger, she remembered being at school, and she went into the girls' bathroom one day. Well, she overheard some girls laughing and giggling, and she said they were doing the whole Mary thing. So she kind of stayed there and listened to them. She said they did it 3 times, and all of a sudden, the lights went out in the bathroom. She heard these girls start screaming. And finally, the lights came back on, and she said the girls started to look at her and were like, did you see her? Did you see her? And she's like, who? And they said, there was a girl right next to you when the lights went out. And she kind of looked around and was like, no, there wasn't. And she said these girls ran out of the bathroom screaming. She stayed behind. She went to go wash her hands. And she said as she looked up in the mirror, she sees this woman with black hair covering her face, wearing this white dress, just standing there behind her in the mirror. She took off running out of the bathroom screaming, and she said she told her teacher went in the bathroom, they couldn't find anyone. There was another story from a girl named Caitlin. Caitlin said that her and her brother used to joke around and they would do the whole Mary thing. Well, she said one day she went into the bathroom and she said it 2 times. But she said, you know what, this is ridiculous. And she kind of forgot about it. Well, she said later that night, she went into the bathroom to take a shower. She said as she walked by the mirror, she said it one last time. And she said she got into the shower, and as she turned on the water, the lights went out. She said next thing she knew, the shower curtain fell all the way to the ground, and she ran out of the bathroom screaming. And her mom went in there, she looked, she didn't see anything. Well, she said she told her brother about this, and her brother was like, you're making this up. So about a week later, they're home alone. And they're sitting down in the living room watching a movie when all of a sudden they hear the shower turn on upstairs. And they're like, who is in the bathroom? And then they start hearing these cries, like a woman wailing. So they both go upstairs. They go by the bathroom. They slowly open the door. And they said as they went to the curtains and pulled it back, they looked and there was no one there. They ran out of the house until their parents got back. And she said a couple weeks later, she was in her bedroom. It's the middle of the night. She hears the shower kick on by itself. So she goes to the bathroom, and she said when she opened the curtain this time, she seen a woman in a white dress with black hair covering her face laying in the bathtub. So what do you think? Is the legend real? This girl named Jennifer, and she had a cat named Francisco. Now, Francisco was this black cat that was a stray that she rescued one day, and he loved being outside. So during the day, she would let him roam around outdoors, and then at night, let him back in. Well, as usual, one morning, he goes to the back door, starts scratching and meowing, so she lets Francisco out. Well, that night, Francisco never comes back home. So she's very, worried. The next night, right? Francisco once again does not come back, which is unusual because like every night he would return. Finally, the third night, she is just frantic and like, I don't know if something happened to him. I hope he returns. And then at the back door, she hears meowing and something scratching. And when she goes to open the door, there's Francisco. So she's so excited to see him that she picks him up and starts giving him a hug. However, he doesn't like this. He, lets off a loud meow and then just jumps down on the ground and takes off running. Which was odd because Francisco was always this very affectionate cat. The next day, she started noticing that Francisco was acting really weird. He was tearing up things. He wasn't using the litter box, but he was going all over the floor. And he just seemed very reluctant to be close to Jennifer. Well, that night, she goes to bed. And she wakes up in the middle of the night to Francisco, who is sitting on her chest, just staring at her. And he's got his claws extended, pushed into her skin to where it actually hurts. And she's like, Francisco, what are you doing? What are you doing? And she said the look that Francisco gave her was like he wanted to hurt her. So she, lifts him up, throws him on the ground, and he just takes off running out of the room. The next morning when she wakes up, she sees that Francisco has completely destroyed the entire house, ripped up pictures and the couch and everything, which once again was unlike Francisco. So she says, you know what? Tomorrow, Francisco, I'm taking you to the vet. We're getting you checked out because something's not right. So that night, she decides she's going to put Francisco in a kennel. So she puts him in the kennel in the front living room, and she goes to bed. About 12:30 in the morning, she hears a crashing sound, and she hears her front door opened. So she's freaking out, did someone just break in the house or what's going on? So she grabs a baseball bat, she walks out down the hallway and goes into the living room, and she can see that the front door is clearly open. She searches the house, she doesn't find anybody. But when she goes back in the living room to close the door, she sees Francisco's kennel is open and he's now missing. So she runs right away back to her room to call the police because she thinks someone has stolen him. And as she's walking down the hallway, Francisco jumps out at her and just starts attacking her, and he's clawing her and he's biting her, and she throws him on the ground and he comes running back and just keeps attacking her. Well, she noticed that there was this crucifix that she had been given as a young girl in her church that she had hanging on the wall that had been knocked down by Francisco. And she grabs the crucifix and puts it next to Francisco. He jumps down and takes off running out the front door. Well, she closes up the front door and is like, Francisco is not coming back. He's on his own. He can live on the streets. Well, about a day or two later, she ends up getting a call from her friend who said she's coming over. She has something important she has to tell her. So her friend shows up and she's got this bag and she comes inside and she goes, I don't know how to break this to you, but about a couple days ago, I had found Francisco and he had been hit by a car. I had him cremated. Here's his collar and here's everything. But I didn't know how to break the news to you because I knew you'd be so distraught. And instantly, Jennifer is like, well, who was that cat that was inside my house? Because it had the exact same collar that her friend had brought her.
On the afternoon of April 25th, 2007, a 25-year-old police officer named Martin Arnold and his partner Michelle sat in their police cruiser in the parking lot of a public park in Heilbronn, Germany. They were on their lunch break, and Martin was eating a sandwich and looking out across the park, which was mostly empty because it was a weekday afternoon. So Heilbronn was a medium-sized city in southern Germany, and it was generally a pretty safe area. I mean, for the most part, the worst crimes committed here were like break-ins or muggings. So Martin and his partner, they didn't have a whole lot of action happening around them. However, something Martin and Michelle and basically all police officers, for the most part, in Germany were acutely aware of was over the last 14 years, all across Germany, there had been this rash of crimes ranging from, home invasions and robberies to at least 2 murders that had basically all been committed based on DNA evidence by the same person, this singular woman whose nickname was the woman with no face. And she still hadn't been caught yet. And so in essence, all police officers in Germany were sort of like always on the lookout for this woman. She was like the most elusive and sought after criminal in the whole country. But on this particular day, as Martin sat in his cruiser on his lunch break, he wasn't really thinking about how he might get involved in capturing the woman with no face. Instead, he was just worried about his sandwich. And so he went to take another bite of his sandwich when he heard the back doors of his cruiser open up. And he whipped around and he looked, and there were these 2 people who had approached the cruiser, and each of them were carrying a gun. And before Martin or Michelle could do anything, these people raised their weapons and they fired, and everything went black. Within minutes, officers from the Heilbronn Police Department had swarmed the scene. They found Michelle, who was deceased from a gunshot wound to the head. And Martin had also been shot in the head, but he was still alive. He was just unconscious. And so an ambulance rushed him to the hospital while detectives taped off the crime scene and began looking for evidence. Some officers immediately began canvassing the area looking for potential witnesses. But because the park was basically empty all day, there was nobody who had seen the shooting. Other officers looked for footprints in the ground, around the car. They also began looking for fingerprints on the car, bullet casings, hairs, other fibers inside or outside the car. But there was nothing. And so at this point, the investigators are like, okay, all we know is there's been at least one shooter, maybe multiple, because they have not spoken to Martin, who's unconscious. They have no idea what he's seen. So they're seeing that at least one person has managed to come up to a police cruiser, undetected presumably, open up the doors, shoot both officers in the head, and then get away without leaving behind any obvious evidence. It just seemed crazy. Like, have we just missed something? Like, there's got to be something here that sort of points us in the direction of who was responsible. And so in a last-ditch attempt to find something helpful at the crime scene, one officer swabbed the inside of the car for potential DNA evidence. They knew that if there was DNA, it could belong to Martin or Michelle or anybody else who might have been inside of this car, and any of those people didn't have to be the shooter or shooters. They could just be people in the car. But it was possible that DNA found inside that car could belong to whoever did this. However, they wouldn't know about this DNA sample until the crime lab analyzed the swabs, and that could take a really long time. But it was certainly worth it, and so they sent the swabs off for testing. While they waited for the DNA results to come in, the Heilbronn PD continued trying to find witnesses or any other helpful evidence, anything, but they kept coming up empty. Their only potential witness here was Martin himself, but he was still in a coma at the hospital. It was not until weeks later that finally the police had something to go on, because the DNA results came back. And not only was there DNA found in the car, but what this DNA revealed sent the media into a frenzy and brought this investigation to the national level. At this time, it's mid-2007, and a 44-year-old German prosecutor named Gunther Horn was sitting in his office when he got a call from his boss. And his boss told him, the woman without a face has struck again, this time in Heilbronn. Gunther's eyes went wide and he immediately sat up and listened really intently as his boss explained that 2 police officers in Heilbronn had been shot in the head while parked in their cruiser near this park. And the woman with no face, her DNA had been found in the backseat of their car. Now, Gunther had always been fascinated by the woman without a face. So he was ecstatic when his boss asked if he, Gunther, would lead the investigation into this most recent crime in Heilbronn that was potentially connected to this woman, and to try to finally identify who she was once and for all. Gunther immediately said he would do it, and he got to work. Right away, Gunther organized a task force to investigate this woman without a face. The task force was based in Heilbronn, but at Gunther's command, detectives on the team began reinvestigating all these crimes from all over Germany that this woman was involved in. They searched for patterns, for evidence, or witnesses that maybe had been missed during the original investigation. And through this effort, this team was able to come up with a very rough idea of who this woman was. They knew that she was very likely a heroin user because police had once recovered a heroin needle with her DNA on it at a public park. They also knew she had a lot of criminal contacts because many of her crimes involved co-conspirators. But anytime police had interrogated her co-conspirators, they had refused to say anything about her. It was like they were afraid of her. And there were a couple of other details that struck Gunter as being pretty odd. The only evidence this woman had ever left behind at any of these crime scenes was her DNA. And they didn't have a match in the database to pair it with, so they only knew she was a woman, but they didn't know who she was. In 14 years, she'd never left behind a fingerprint, a footprint, a hair, or anything else. So it seemed like, her crimes were extremely deliberate, very clean, very well planned. But also, she was clearly leaving behind her DNA at all these crime scenes. It almost seemed like that was her calling card. Also, what Gunter and his task force discovered is that in many of the crimes committed by the woman without a face, witnesses described seeing what looked like a man at the scene, not a woman. And this was obviously weird because based on the DNA evidence, they knew unequivocally that their suspect, this woman without a face, was biologically female, not male. And so to Gunter, it seemed like, maybe this man that was being seen at these crime scenes was just one of the woman's co-conspirators, or maybe the woman without a face dressed as a man to avoid being caught. But it was impossible to know without a first-hand witness who had actually seen the suspect up close. That was what Gunter really needed. And in late May, about a month after the shooting in Heilbronn, Gunter got a call about that exact type of witness that he was looking for. That same day, Gunter walked into a hospital in Heilbronn, and he saw Heilbronn police officer Martin Arnold laying in a hospital bed with his eyes open. He'd been in a coma for a month now after being shot, but he had woken up. And he clearly was Gunter's best chance of catching the woman without a face, because presumably, before he was shot, he might have gotten a look at her. So he was that witness who might be able to describe her. And so Gunter, he walked over, sat down next to Martin's hospital bed, and he asked him to please tell him everything he remembered about what happened. And Martin, he was very distraught about the whole thing. He's just woken up. He's just learned that his partner has died. And so he's very emotional. But he ultimately tells Gunter that, realistically, he can't really remember what happened. He basically turned around. He saw there was, these two figures. But after he got shot, it was like he just didn't remember anything. And so realistically, Martin had almost nothing to offer, which meant Gunter was back to square one. For the next 2 years, Gunter and his task force worked tirelessly to try to catch the woman without a face. They spent millions of euros, clocked thousands of hours of overtime, and even offered a reward equivalent to $400,000 for information. But none of it led anywhere. And adding insult to injury was the fact that the whole time this investigation is going on, the woman without a face kept committing crimes. The task force connected her to at least 6 more break-ins, 1 more robbery, and another murder. And these crimes weren't even just happening in Germany anymore. They also found the woman's DNA at crime scenes in France and in Austria. So now the entire region was on alert for this woman who seemed like this impossibly cunning international criminal genius. And Gunter, he couldn't help but start to wonder if he would ever be able to catch her. But then, in March of 2009, Gunter got a call from a police officer in France. And what this officer told him would change everything. According to this officer, the French police were currently investigating a potential murder. They told Gunter that a badly burned body had been found in France, and it was so disfigured that for a while, all police knew was that it was a man. However, an asylum seeker who had come to France had recently been reported missing, and police wondered if maybe the body belonged to him. So, on a hunch, they had gotten his asylum application paperwork, which included his fingerprints, and they'd been able to lift a DNA profile from those prints. But when they had the DNA analyzed, the results didn't make any sense. And the French police were so baffled by these results that they were now calling Gunter, because they knew if there's someone who needs to know about this, it's Gunter. And so Gunter, after being fully filled in about the baffling results that they had found, he was also at first very confused, but at the same time, he felt this new surge of hope. Because to him, it felt like As bizarre as this was, maybe this was the break he'd been looking for the past 2 years. Maybe this was the time he was finally going to figure out who this woman really was. So he thanked the French police officer and then brought this new information to his team. And within just a few days, this new information from France did lead Gunter and his team to the woman with no face. It would turn out this woman, the international criminal mastermind behind dozens of crimes, including at least 4 murders, who had evaded capture for 16 years all across the entirety of Germany and beyond, appeared to everybody who actually knew her as a totally normal person. Like, nobody suspected she was actually responsible for all these horrible crimes. She was a young woman who lived in southern Germany, who during the day she appeared to work at a factory, and at night she appeared to just go home. Like, she lived a very ordinary life. And so again, nobody ever suspected her. But what the French police found when they analyzed the DNA from the missing man's asylum application was that that man's fingerprints somehow contained this woman's DNA. This was clearly impossible. I mean, primarily because the man was biologically male and the woman without a face was biologically female. They knew that. So even if the asylum seeker had secretly been this woman, that wasn't really possible. And so when the French police saw this, they knew they had to tell Gunter because he was in charge of the woman without a face investigation. And when he and his team looked into this, they figured out something shocking. It was precisely this woman's normal-seeming life, in particular, her very normal-seeming job at the factory, that made everything she did possible. Because at this factory, this woman sat on an assembly line, helping to manufacture the very cotton swabs that police use in DNA testing. On any given single shift, this woman would touch hundreds or even thousands of these swabs and would accidentally leave her DNA behind on each one. There was no international serial killer, woman criminal mastermind parading around the whole country. No, there was just a lot of contaminated cotton swabs. And so in essence, police had wasted all this time, nearly 2 decades, millions and millions of euros, and thousands of hours of overtime, chasing a criminal who didn't exist. It was later determined that the police officer Martin Arnold and his partner Michelle were shot by 2 members of a neo-Nazi group. However, many of the other murders previously attributed to the woman without a face are still unsolved, primarily because police spent so long chasing the wrong suspect. Today, the case of the woman without a face is considered one of the biggest embarrassments in German police history.
Might have known the story of real-life boogeyman.
Get ready with me when I tell you guys this ghost story. This story was sent into my email, and if you have any ghost stories, scary stories, or paranormal encounters that you want to share, you can send them to the email in my bio. I was 9 or 10 at the time, and there was a small playground near where we lived, the kind that was attached to a local school. Nothing special, just swings, a slide, and a quiet street running alongside it. One late afternoon, my brother and I walked there to play. He was around 12 at the time, and we mostly kept to ourselves. He'd do his thing and I'd do mine, and I remember this very clearly. I was the kind of kid who didn't lie, like ever. So what happened that day has never made any sense to me. I was sitting on the swings, just going back and forth, when I noticed someone walking towards me, a little girl. She seemed out of place, not in a super dramatic way, just like she didn't quite belong there. Even now, I can picture her perfectly. She was short with a round face, and her hair was in braids that hung past her collarbones. She was dressed neatly. A navy blue dress, white socks, black dress shoes. Like she was dressed for something formal, not a playground. But the strangest part wasn't her clothes, it was her skin. At the time, I thought that she looked dirty, like she had been playing outside for too long, covered in dirt. But it didn't look like normal dirt. It looked darker, smudged and uneven, almost like ash. She walked right up to me and asked very calmly, "Have you seen my brother?" Her voice wasn't scared or rushed. It was just flat. I told her no, I hadn't seen anyone, and she just nodded. Then she turned and started walking toward the end of the street besides the playground. I watched her the whole time. She didn't run, she didn't look back, she just kept walking until she reached the end of the road and disappeared. I remember being confused. I wasn't scared at the time, I was just thrown off almost. Like I had missed something. But I didn't have time to think about it for long because a few minutes later, someone else came up to me. And this time it was a boy, a little older than the girl. And just like her, something about him felt off. He was dressed neatly too. A blue polo shirt, tan shorts. His hair was combed perfectly to the side, like someone had taken time to fix it before he left the house. He didn't look messy. He didn't look like he'd been playing. He looked placed, like he didn't belong in that moment. He walked up to me and asked, "Have you seen my sister?" And I remember this part so clearly. I didn't hesitate. I just pointed down the street, the same direction the girl had gone. And I told him, yeah, she went that way. He didn't question it. Didn't say anything else. He just turned and started walking. Same pace, same direction, toward the end of the street. And just like the girl, he disappeared. What? This time I didn't look away. I watched the exact spot where he should have been walking, but he wasn't there anymore. It was like he had just stopped existing. That's when my brother came running over to me, and he looked confused, almost concerned. The first thing he asked was, "Who are you talking to?" I told him. I said a little girl had come up to me asking about her brother, and then a boy came up to me looking for his sister. Simple and normal. At least it should have been. But the look on his face changed. He just stared at me and said there was no one there. I remember arguing with him, telling him yes, there was. I had just talked to them. They were right there. But he wouldn't budge. He said he had been watching me the whole time, and I had been talking to no one. A few years passed, and I didn't think about it much. It just became one of those weird childhood memories that didn't quite make sense, until one day it came up in conversation. And this time, I decided to look into it. I searched the address of that playground, just out of curiosity, just to see if anything had happened there. And I found something. Years before I ever went there, there had been a house nearby. And inside that house, there were two siblings, a boy and a girl. One day, their mother left the house with the oven still on, and a fire started. And the children were trapped inside and didn't make it out. The report said the fire had spread quickly, and the house was engulfed in flames, and there was nothing anyone could do. The part that stays with me even now was that one of their favorite places to go was that playground. The same one I was sitting in, same street they walked down, the same place where I watched them disappear.
Hey guys, I'm back with another spooky scary story time. This one comes from one of my supporters. Story time took place in 2023, where it was Angela and 3 of her friends. She didn't give out any names or anything like that. She just said it was 2 girls, 1 boy. Altogether, it was 4 of them. And if you know anything about the Queen Mary ship, that ship is allegedly haunted, and it has a lot of supernatural things that go on this ship. So if you want to do more research on it, you could just type it in the little search bar, and TikTok will explain it all to you. Multiple people that have their own, scary story times with actual proof on this ship. But in this particular story time, I don't have any proof of this. But yeah, let's proceed with the story. So like I said, they wanted to stay for about 3 nights. The first night, everything was pretty cool. It wasn't until the second night that things started to happen and be weird. They decided to stay the night in one of the ship's, I guess like little hotel rooms that they might have there. And in the midst of them doing that, every time they turned the lights off to go to sleep in the dark, because they all slept in the same room, the covers would get pulled off of them. And it wouldn't be like dramatically being pulled off of them. It would be like slowly but gradually being pulled off of them, to where they will wake up and realize that the blanket is not on the 4 of them. They were like, okay, that's pretty weird. So still on the second night, after they realized, I guess they took a little nap. Once they seen that the blanket wasn't on them, they woke up. They was like, okay, we're going to scope the scenery out on this ship while everything is like supposed to be quiet. Everybody's supposed to be asleep in their rooms. Nobody's supposed to be wandering but them. They're walking around and stuff. And while they're walking around looking at different areas of the ship, they start hearing like little giggles that sound like it's from children coming from like little corners of down the hall, around the corner and stuff like that. Obviously, no kid is going to be up at 3-4 o'clock in the morning wandering this ship, so they know that it is like spirits. They know what they signed up to do here. That was on the second night, right? Now we're on to the third night. They go to sleep, wake up, the covers are not on them, right? And this night, this is when they said they actually felt the covers being pulled off of them, but they just slept it off somehow. And when they woke up, you know, the blanket wasn't on them, but they proceed to go on with their day. Like, we're not gonna let this bother us. We knew what we were signing up for when we came here, so it's not really that scary, right? So that's what they're saying to themselves. It's actually daytime now when this weird encounter happens. So they're walking around on the Queen of Mary ship again, exploring some new parts of the ship that they didn't, you know, explore before. They hear running behind them. So they look and they don't see anybody running after them. They did say that there were a lot of people up wandering around, but in the particular area they were in, nobody was close enough for them to be hearing that type of movement right behind them. But it sounded like somebody was running towards them at full force, like literally trying to take all four of them down, because they were walking like in a straight line, I guess, but walking forward. They were like, once they heard that, that's when it really shook them, and they was like, okay, like, I'm glad today is our last day, like, we're leaving. That was pretty much it. The Queen of Mary ship, I heard, has so much history. You could definitely do your own research on the Queen of Mary ship, but also definitely follow me, because I have a whole bunch of spooky, scary stories on my page, and I'm pretty sure if you like story times and stuff, you would definitely like them. It's Jay Gambino back with another spooky, scary story time. This one is also from one of my supporters, because I'm thinking about doing these a little bit more, being that I've been telling so much personal story times. But this one comes from somebody named Safira. Don't know how old she is. You know, I didn't really look into that, but she did DM me with this story, so I'm going to share it. So Safira moved into a new house. I think she said she was the only child, and they just moved into this house in, like, I want to say late October of 2025. We're still fresh in 2026, so they still live here. She said that her parents have been telling her basically that they feel like there's a mimic in the house mimicking Safira. Weird activity didn't start until a month into them moving into the house that they're living in. And so it was one particular night that Safira was spending the night at her cousin's house, and it was just her mom and her dad home. Her mom was chilling, reading a book on the bed, you know, with her nightlight on, and her father, I guess, was watching TV or something. They were getting ready for bed. It was like 11:30, 12 o'clock, like, you know, at night/morning. And they kept hearing like a kid playing around in Safira's room, but they knew Safira wasn't there. It freaked them out a lot. They kept hearing giggling. They kept hearing toys being played with. They kept hearing like movement, like if the kid was jumping around in the room. But they didn't bother to get up and check anything, because they were fully aware, like, our daughter is not here. The next day, they go to get Safira from the cousin's house. They come back and they tell her the weird activity that was happening in her room. And Safira is like, my parents are crazy. Like, at first she was like, my parents are just crazy. Until a few nights after that, I don't really know how much of a time frame it was. She needed a babysitter, so her parents hired a babysitter to watch her at the house. And they were going on like a little date night. They didn't leave until around 11:30, 12 o'clock in the morning, same time. So it's her babysitter watching her. She said that her babysitter's name was Miracle. Miracle was like 19, 20 babysitting, so she still was kind of young. She had made Safira get ready to go to sleep in her room. And so Miracle was sitting in the living room, which is downstairs, watching TV, and she heard a lot of playing around going on upstairs. So she goes upstairs to check if Safira is up, opens the door, Safira is asleep. And so she's like, well, that's weird. Maybe she's just playing a prank on me, acting like she sleep whole time she's up. So Saphira's babysitter decides that she's gonna catch Saphira hopping out of the bed, playing around, trying to, play with her mind. And so she's standing by Saphira's door, but she has the door closed. And she waits probably like 5 to 10 minutes, and she's just standing there waiting until she starts hearing playful, noise going around in the room, right? She hears toys being played with. She basically hears the same thing that Saphira's parents were hearing. And so she opens the door very quickly while she's hearing this noise. And when she opens the door, the light is off in the room. So the room is pitch black dark. And when she opens the door, she can't see anything. So she turns the light on. And when she turns the light on, she sees that Saphira is still asleep. So Miracle gets spooked out. She wakes up Saphira and tells her, come downstairs and go to sleep on the couch, because she was already knowing what was going on. Like, this is not normal. There must be a spirit in here with her. I'm not going to leave her up here by herself. They both decide to go on the couch and watch some movies because it was hard for Saphira to go back to sleep after she heard that news. Moral of the story is, while Saphira and Miracle were sitting on the couch, they still were hearing a kid play in Saphira's room. And they had to stick through it until like 3 o'clock in the morning. Miracle thought she was going to get in trouble for having Saphira up at that time of night, but they explained to the parents what was happening. And the parents were very much aware of the weird activity that goes on in this house. The babysitter didn't get in trouble or anything like that. But yeah, she said still to this day, being that we're in March of 2026, they still hear playing going around, and it's only in Saphira's room. She doesn't really sleep in there or anything like that. But that's it for the story time. If you guys want me to tell your scary story times, DM me and I'll share them without a problem. And also follow me.
Have you seen this video? We are getting reports that your son has been found in your basement. Yeah. Sir? Mr. Bothell, are you what? Your son has been found alive in your base. What? This father went on national television to beg the public for help to find his 12-year-old missing son. And this was his reaction when they found his child in his basement. Oh man, let me back up first. It's June 2014 in Detroit, Michigan, and 12-year-old Charlie Bothell is living with his dad, Charles, and his stepmother, Monica. And from the outside, this looks like a pretty regular household. Like, they've got a dad, stepmom, young kids. Normal enough that you would not think twice about it if you drove past them. But inside that house, Charlie's life is basically a prison sentence that nobody knows about. Charles and Monique had made it so that Charlie basically doesn't even exist outside those walls. He doesn't go outside unless it's for something like school, a controlled trip to the grocery store, and he had no friends, no play dates, no riding around the block. Nothing that a 12-year-old kid should get to do. And you can sort of picture what that does to a kid over time, right? Like, the world just shrinks. The walls in the house become the walls of the world. And the people inside that house become the only people who matter, which means that whatever those people say is real becomes real, because there is no one else to tell him otherwise. And then on top of all of that isolation, Charles and Monique have built this punishment system around Charles that is just, I don't know. I mean, it's even hard to describe. Every single day, Charlie is required to complete these exercise routines. 100 push-ups, 200 sit-ups, 100 jumping jacks. I don't know the exact number, but they're extreme. And these are not optional. These are not, hey, kid, let's stay active. This is a 12-year-old being forced through physical training that would make a grown man's muscles give out. And if he doesn't do them well enough, if his form isn't right, or if he looks too slow, or he looks like he's not trying hard enough, he has to start the entire thing over from the beginning. And if he still doesn't perform it to their standards after that, they just don't feed him. Like, that's the system. Exercise until your body can't do it anymore. And if you fail, you don't eat. At 12 years old, that is what he has to endure. But there's another punishment, and I really need you to picture this one. They called it reaching for excellence. And what that means in practice is Charlie standing with both of his arms raised straight above his head held there. He's not allowed to drop them for extended periods of time until his shoulders are burning and his arms are shaking and every muscle from his fingertips to his ribs is screaming to just let them fall. But if he even tries to drop them, or if he makes his dad angry, Charles hits him with a PVC pipe on his body multiple times. And I just, like, what is the point of that? Like, what is the goal? Please tell me, what 12-year-old child is supposed to learn something from that? It makes no sense. That's not discipline. It's not parenting. It is just cruelty with a name on it. So on Sunday, before all of this becomes public, Monique decides that Charlie hasn't completed his exercise routine to her satisfaction. And rather than, I don't know, saying, okay, buddy, you look tired, let's just call it for today, like a normal human being, she grabs him and drags him down to the basement. She walks him over to a spot behind a big stack of boxes. She points at it and tells him to get back there. And then she leans in close to this 12-year-old kid and she tells him to shut up, not to move, don't do anything. And if he didn't listen, then she could make him disappear with her sharp knives. And so Charlie does what she says. He goes behind the boxes, he sits down, and he stays quiet and doesn't move. Now, I don't know exactly what was going through Charles and Monique's head over the next couple of days, but by June 16th, it seems like Charles kind of starts to realize that people are going to begin wondering where Charlie is. Like at some point, somebody is going to notice that this kid hasn't shown up to school. He hasn't been seen around the neighborhood. He hasn't been anywhere, honestly. And questions are going to start getting asked that Charlie doesn't really want to answer. And so Charlie picks up the phone and he calls the Detroit police himself. He tells them that he doesn't know where his son is, but the last time he saw him was at home, that Charlie is just gone and he needs help finding him. Meanwhile, Charlie is underneath their feet in the basement behind a stack of dirty boxes, confused and scared, probably wondering why the two people in the world who are supposed to care for him and love him have decided to do this instead. I honestly feel like this is the part of the story that sits with me the most. Like, it's just so hard to comprehend. On June 17th, the Detroit police officially announced that a 12-year-old boy named Charlie Barthel is missing and they need the public's help in finding him. And that kicks off this massive search. I'm talking Detroit PD, the FBI, the community. Everybody is out looking for this kid because it's a 12-year-old boy who vanished from his own home. That's every parent's worst nightmare, and people want to help. So over the next several days, they search that entire block. They go through every single corner of that neighborhood. They search the family's townhouse. They even bring dogs into the basement, the very basement where Charlie is hiding behind a stack of boxes. But for some reason, they find absolutely nothing. And I still don't fully understand how that happened. How do you bring a search dog into a basement where a living child is sitting behind some cardboard boxes and still come up empty? I don't know, but they did. And so now the police are starting to feel stuck. They search everywhere they can think of, and the only direction their gut keeps pointing towards is Charles. Because from the moment he called the station, there has been this weird, guilty energy around him that the officers just can't shake. This sort of aroma of guilt that's just hovering in the air around everything he says and does. Like, the way he's acting doesn't match, my son is missing, please help me. It's off. Something about it is just off. And as police officers, they're trained to pick up on that like gut feeling of this person isn't acting right. It's not something that they just ignore. So they decide to act on it. They make Charles take a polygraph, and the results came back inconclusive, which, it doesn't prove anything on its own, but it also doesn't clear him. And it definitely doesn't make the cops feel any better about the situation. And then on June 25th, something happens that I genuinely think is one of the most insane moments I have ever seen on live television. So Charles is sitting in a studio doing a live interview with Nancy Grace. And he's on camera looking like a sad little puppy who just got his toy taken. And while he's sitting there ready to tell the world how sad he's been, how badly he wants his boy back, Nancy Grace gets a call and she reads it out loud. She tells Charles on camera that police have just found a boy matching Charlie's description in the basement of his family's townhouse. And the look on this man's face. He starts stammering and his eyes kind of go wide, but not in the right way. It's more like the kind of look of somebody whose brain is spinning bad because the thing they thought they had just hidden got pulled out into the light on live television. And he starts saying things like, but we already checked the basement. Law enforcement already searched down there. And it's like, sir, your son was just found alive after being missing for 11 days. Why is your first reaction to explain why he shouldn't be there instead of, I don't know, being happy that he's found? He clearly did not practice his reaction good enough. When officers went into the basement that day, what they found was a child crouched behind a makeshift barricade of boxes. And when they got closer, they pretty quickly realized that the child was Charlie. And they approached him very carefully, very gently, saying something like, "Hey, Charlie, it's the police, bud. Are you okay?" And after a few minutes, Charlie stood up and he walked over to them. But what they saw when he stepped out from behind those boxes turned this entire case around. Because Charlie was severely underweight. He's got marks all over his body, and he didn't have the face of a kid who ran away from home and hid in the basement for fun. This is a child who has been hurt systematically over a long period of time by the people who were supposed to be raising him. And so without any hesitation, the police take Charlie straight to the hospital, and when he's finally released, he runs straight into the arms of his biological mother. Because by this point, Charles and Monique are both in handcuffs and are being questioned by detectives who now understand that this missing child case they've been working on for almost 2 weeks was never a missing child case at all. Now, here's where this story turned to something that honestly just makes me want to ugh. Monique, the woman who dragged the 12-year-old kid into a basement and threatened to cut him with kitchen knives, she already had a probation violation on her record. And within 1 day of being arrested, she gets a personal bond and goes home with nothing but an ankle monitor. And as long as she stays out of trouble for the next 6 months, that her record will get wiped clean. 6 months for what she did to that child. I just don't get it. And then in January of 2016, a full year and a half later, Charles finally stands in front of a judge and admits out loud in a courtroom that yes, he kidnapped his own son. He held him hostage in his basement and he struck him with plastic pipes multiple times if he didn't perform. And after hearing this, the court sentences him to 18 months of probation and some anger management classes. 18 months of probation. Am I the only one who was shocked and disappointed here? I mean, he did also lose custody of Charlie, which I suppose is the only outcome of this entire thing that actually kind of makes sense. So he went on to live with his biological mother. I don't know what his life looks like right now, honestly, but that might just be how he would want it. That is all for today. And Charlie, if you ever come across this, I truly hope that you are living a much happier, much fulfilling life. Group hug.
The woman behind me is Giselle Pellico. Her case is probably one of the most depraved I've ever covered, and a lot of people don't know how bad it actually gets. If you're unfamiliar with the case, allow me to explain. So this is Giselle Pellico. She's a 72-year-old retired grandmother living in the south of France with her husband of 50 years. This is her husband, Dominique Pellico. Now, Giselle doesn't know it yet, but Dominique Pellico is a piece of shit who probably has a disease the size of a button mushroom. I said what I said. She discovered that her husband of 50 years had been drugging her unconscious and inviting strangers into their home to assault her while she slept. I spent weeks researching this case for the podcast, and every time I thought it couldn't get worse, it did. I'm going to share a few details with you because this story deserves to not be sanitized, but reminder that I tell a lot of dark stories here, so viewer discretion is advised, but follow along if you want to hear more. So here are a couple things people don't know about this case. So did you know that Giselle actually thought that she had dementia? She was convinced that she had dementia or a brain tumor or something was seriously wrong with her. She couldn't remember when she'd fall asleep. She couldn't remember her nights. She'd have conversation with her kids and not remember talking to them at all. She once slept until like 6 at night. She said she woke up one night with her husband acting funny, then she fell back asleep, but it's implied that he was probably in the middle of some kind of assault. Here's Stark as a palate cleanser, and here's a detail that really stood out to me. Giselle Pellico actually contracted multiple STDs as a result of these assaults. And what makes this case impossible to look away from is the timing. This case broke when we were already asking really impossibly difficult questions about the Epstein files, about men, about power. Now, what I've told you barely scratches the surface, because the full details would probably get this video removed. I encourage everybody to do a deep dive on this story, because it brings a lot of stuff up to the surface. I spent weeks going down the rabbit hole on this case, and I really think this is one of the most important cases of our lifetime. I just released part 1 of my 2-part podcast series about Giselle Pellico, if you'd like to listen. But if not, I encourage you to do your own deep dive into this story, because it really deserves to be heard fully.